You're listening to Myers-Briggs Question Corner with Edythe Richards.
Hello, folks, and thanks for joining us for another episode of Myers-Briggs Question Corner. It has been a long time since we've recorded an episode of this podcast. I know I've had a lot going on, and my co-host David has had a lot going on too. And we've had some changes that will be happening in the near future, but we'll be talking about that in a bit. So as we are recording, it is March of 2022. And of course, there are a lot of things going on in the world right now. The Olympics has ended, and there's a lot of terrible stuff happening in Ukraine. So our hearts are truly with the folks over there. We hope and pray that you are staying safe and well. COVID is still with us, and many of us are heading back to in-person work, myself included. And inflation is big news, very concerning as we are seeing prices spike everywhere. So hope you are all staying safe because these are pretty scary and unpredictable times that we're living in. But one thing that is predictable, we all have to communicate. And that means that even the most introverted introvert who has been loving life for the past couple of years, cooped up all snug at home in their safe space, eventually you all are going to have to come out and interact with the rest of us. And that's just likely to cause a certain amount of anxiety. So me being the extrovert that I am, I think it's only fair that I ask my co-host and producer and introvert extraordinaire, David, if I'm right on this one. Does coming back into the world and interacting with people cause anxiety for introverted types? What do you say, David?
Well, hello, Edythe, and hello, listeners. You know, Edythe, I'm always amazed at your ability to perfectly capture what I'm feeling inside, whether it's positive or negative. And you know how I feel about emerging from my cocoon up here in the Highlands of Scotland. Now, someday I am going to venture out and explore other areas of the world. But until that happens, I have to admit that I'm perfectly happy to be right here in my own space where everything's familiar and comfortable. And I don't have to interact in person with anyone other than my partner and my cats.
Yeah, well, you know, David, I do understand from an intellectual standpoint and from a Myers-Briggs standpoint as well. And we have talked many times about how introverts and extroverts' brains are wired differently, and as a result, how we each gravitate towards certain activities and certain people even. But I have to admit, from a personal standpoint, sometimes it's really hard for me to understand the thought process of an introvert. And one of the first questions that pops into my head is, don't you get bored being by yourself all the time?
Bored? No, not me, never. But seriously, I don't think I ever do truly get bored. And if I do, it's not because of lack of interaction with other people. I'm perfectly content to just read, tinker with my tools and technology equipment, watch TV. In fact, I'd say that when I'm forced to go to a social gathering, that's when I'm more likely to be bored. I'll also feel bored if I'm not challenged enough. Now, I'm someone, like many other INTJs, who wants to learn, and I'll very easily go down rabbit holes in subjects that are enjoyable to me. But boredom as it relates to people? I'll tell you this. If I'm forced to socialize, to me that is boring. And so this thing you call small talk, Edythe, and I know that's the topic you've chosen for us to talk about, well, it's not really my best subject.
Now, the question is, did I do this on purpose just to mess with you a little?
You probably did.
Yeah, so I thought small talk would be a good topic for us to delve into for two reasons. First, it's a topic that often comes up when I give my Myers-Briggs workshops or work with clients to help them get a better understanding of their personality preferences. Inevitably, the introverted types say something about disliking networking events because they feel like they have to make small talk. and especially for introverted intuitive types, but some sensing types as well. They often find these situations either a huge waste of time because they're so superficial, or just too difficult because they don't see themselves as being very good at small talk. The other reason I wanted to focus on this topic today is because we're at a time where there are a lot of businesses that are reopening and employees that are returning to on-site work locations. And we're going to be forced into these conversations at some point. And let's face it, no matter who you are, there are times when you're going to have small talk with someone, whether it's your relatives at a holiday gathering, or whether it's your coworkers at a team meeting, or someone in line with you at the grocery store. It's a part of life.
Edythe, this is sadly true, but that doesn't mean that you have to like it. You mentioned family gatherings, and I hadn't thought about that, but it is an example of small talk, isn't it? If you haven't seen a cousin for a long time and suddenly you're together at, say, your sister's wedding, I mean, what do you talk about? It's hard for me to even talk about these things on a podcast. Now, Edythe, I just feel like I'm terrible at small talk. I've been in many situations where someone's come up to me, say on the street. I live in a very small town, and it's one of these places where everybody knows everybody, and they just start talking, and the moment they start, I just want to escape. I hope none of them are listening to this podcast. Anyway, and at the moment they start, I just want to escape. I don't know what it is, and it's not like I don't like the person. It's something about being forced unexpectedly into having to talk about the weather or somebody's new puppy or whatever topic they come up with. I guess what I'm saying is that these types of conversations are frustrating to me because they don't really have any true meaning or any depth.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. And if I'm being honest, even as an extrovert, the lack of depth in conversation is frustrating to me, but not to the degree that you're describing it, David. You know, as we're talking, I was thinking that almost all conversations start with some kind of small talk, don't you think?
You know, now that I'm considering this, Edythe, I begrudgingly have to admit that that is true. I mean, even when you and I have a conversation, it starts with, how are you? And I'll ask you about what you've been up to lately, and you'll ask me about how the cats are or how the weather is. So, yeah, I guess these are little conversations to get the conversation going between two people who already know each other well. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that kind of small talk isn't an issue for a lot of people who already have a rapport with the other person. It's easy to just slide into a meaningful conversation in a comfortable way. But when people say small talk to me, I think often what they're talking about is striking up a conversation with a stranger.
Yes, very true. And at least for me, this image of a huge networking event comes to mind. A great big room full of strangers. And that's intimidating even for me. So I want to tell you about this study that was published in the Association of Psychological Science, where it was found that having less small talk and more meaningful conversations is one of the keys to better overall well-being. And this study investigated whether happy and unhappy people differ in the amount of small talk they have versus deep conversations. And what was found was that the people who were the happiest also had twice as many genuine and deep conversations as the unhappy people.
So there's something to this then, my aversion to small talk. Superficial conversations are pointless.
Yeah, well, let's not go there yet. You sound like a conversation snob, David.
A conversation snob. I've not heard of that expression, but I guess I have to say yes, I admit it, I am.
Well, at least you admit it. And truly, I do understand how annoying small talk can be. But really, it's the only way to get a deeper, more meaningful conversation and connection. I mean, you can't just start a conversation by saying, tell me, what's the greatest lesson you've learned in life? Or what fictional character do you resemble the most and why?
That would be unnatural, I suppose. But you're right, Edythe. We're expected to make small talk with people we interact with on a daily basis. Everyone from the person in line with you, your neighbours, your hairdresser, or people you just don't know well, but have to interact with or else you're going to be rude. Somebody at the checkout, for example. Or co-workers. Or the parents of your kids' friends.
And you bring up a good point here, David. When you say you'll be considered rude if you don't say something, first and foremost, I'd say small talk is about being polite. Showing an act of politeness. It shows that we have a certain level of interest in the other person, and it's a building block to move to a deeper level of communication.
It's like a gateway. You have to pass through it if you want to move to the next level. So, to my introvert friends who are tuning in, this is where things get risky. You may not want to risk saying the wrong thing, so you say nothing, and then you miss an opportunity. And I can't tell you how many times this has happened to me. So, as much as I hate to admit it, from time to time, we need to take some calculated risks.
No risk, no reward, right?
True. And that bit about being seen as polite, that's helpful too. I don't want to come across to others as rude. I'm sure none of us do. So, acknowledging that little bit of small talk is expected and required in most social situations. I guess it's something we need to do, as much as many of us may dislike doing it.
Definitely a good point there, David. I like what you said about small talk being a gateway to deeper conversations. There's really no getting around it. Small talk is just a fact of life. And now that we've acknowledged that, we need to talk about how to do it effectively. Let me just say that for someone like myself, being an extrovert, and for those of you who are tuning in who are familiar with Clifton Strengths, so I do have WOO, W-O-O, in my top 5. So I actually enjoy meeting new people and finding out about them, breaking the ice, so to speak. And in most situations, it's a skill that comes pretty naturally to me. Yet, on the other hand, there are times when I feel awkward and either feel like I'm putting my foot in my mouth or I'm trying desperately to connect with someone and they're just not having it. So I think for all the extroverted types out there, this is an opportunity to think about how we connect with others. And just like any skill, sometimes we take it for granted and we do it without really thinking about how we do it.
Yes. You know, it's oddly comforting to hear you talk about it that way, because as an outsider looking in on people like you, it looks to me like you've got it all together, and you can just open your mouth and exactly the right thing comes out. But knowing that there are times that you struggle too, well, that helps to normalize my own fears around this subject.
Well, sure, I'm just as awkward as anyone else, and for whatever reason, it just doesn't come across that way most of the time. But it's a good reminder, as uncomfortable as any of us feels in a social situation, you can bet that the other person or the other people feel equally uncomfortable.
Hence the need for you to share how to put us all at ease.
Right. So granted, this is my own opinion, but there's a lot of research that supports my opinion. And as I was preparing my talking points for today and really thinking about this topic and trying to summarize how to initiate great conversations, it really boils down to 2 things: showing you're curious about the other person and asking the right question at the right time.
It sounds simple when you say it like that. Now, it sounds like a lot of emotional intelligence is needed to pull this off effectively.
Yes, that is a great way of putting it, David. Successful small talk is about demonstrating good emotional intelligence. So let's talk for a moment about the first point, showing curiosity. Now, personally, I don't have a problem doing this. I am very curious about other people. I want to hear people's stories. I want to know where they're from, what sorts of things they like to do, what interesting places in the world they've traveled to, what kind of pets they have, what did they want to be when they grew up. I mean, my curiosity is limitless. And as an extrovert, well, you can imagine if I verbalized that all the time when I first met you, David.
I understand what you mean. I would be like, whoa, slow down, slow down. Now, I'm not sure if it would have made a good impression on me, to be honest. I have to admit, if someone did that to me at the first meeting, or even if it was someone I knew, I'd feel like my privacy was being violated. The voice inside would be saying, why do you want to know all that? Why are you being so nosy? It might even make me a bit paranoid, depending on who the other person is. It would definitely make me uncomfortable.
And that's something we extroverts really need to be mindful of. So we want to start out by demonstrating curiosity with safe topics. The weather is a lot of people's go-to topic to break the ice. And you can always go a little step further with that too. So, for example, I can't believe how much it's been raining today. My shoes got absolutely soaked when I was walking from the metro to this event. Did you take the metro too?
I guess for someone like me, it might actually help to have a few of these conversations in my head before going to a social event.
Right. I think that's a really good strategy for people who struggle with small talk. The weather is always a safe, non-personal topic. So think about what the weather is like today and practice a follow-up statement so you can get a little start to get deeper.
And what about non-verbal cues, Edythe? That's another thing I feel like I struggle with. For example, I don't know where to put my hands or how long to make eye contact for.
Right. Nonverbal cues say so much, much more than the words we use. So eye contact and body language are very important. A big issue we see in today's world is being on the phone. And I see this a lot. People walking around with their eyes glued to their phones, or even worse, staring at their phones when someone else is talking to them. And I'm just going to put this out there. That's pretty rude, for one thing. And for another thing, it shows people that you're not curious about them. You're more interested in whatever is happening on your phone. So it sends out this negative message. And especially if we're trying to network with someone, it's not the message that you want to send.
In these types of situations, we should stay off mobile devices. What about the other things? Hands, posture, eyes.
Practice makes perfect. If you're uncomfortable, it's going to come across in your body language. So I do recommend that people go to low risk types of social situations just to practice being around other people, practice standing, practice watching, things like that. The more you practice, the more natural you'll feel. And as much as possible, you want to convey interest in the other person with open body language. Smiling is always a good thing, and I don't think it's given enough credit. And while we're talking about body language and expression, one way that introverted types are more likely to have problems is with a lack of facial expression. So no smiling, no eye contact, no nothing. And the other person can't really tell if you're engaged or interested or not. And then there's this flat response. So a verbal response that shows no emotion, or a muted response. In these cases, it's going to be difficult to get that other person to communicate with you because essentially you're conveying that you're not curious about them or interested in them.
This is definitely something that's hard for introverts to overcome. We wouldn't want to cross the line to invading somebody else's privacy. So I think we often err on the side of saying nothing. And as you said earlier, Edythe, no risk, no reward. And from what you're saying, it sounds like this can easily be misconstrued as a lack of interest or curiosity. And that's not at all what we intend.
Right, so many potential misunderstandings here. So this first point of mine, demonstrate curiosity. You also have to be mindful of the other person's body language. Do they look uncomfortable when you ask them questions? Do they ask you questions? Is their posture open? Are they making eye contact? Some of these things may be subtle, but again, the more you practice, the better you'll be able to read people and respond appropriately.
Okay, so show you're curious, but watch for that curiosity to be reciprocated. Now, you mentioned that great conversations are about two things, and that's the first. The second, as I recall, was about asking the right question at the right time. Edythe, tell us a little bit more about this.
Right. So this starts with kind of a shared understanding of each other's boundaries. It also starts with curiosity. You want to start with safe questions. For example, the weather, like we mentioned before. Or start with questions where both people have some kind of commonality. So if you're at a work function, you can mention, for example, a presentation the CEO gave last week, but keep it positive. So, example, I was glad to hear John mention that we got that contract with ABC Company. That's going to be really good news for our department.
Okay, now I'm getting an understanding of this now. But what about with strangers? Here's a question I hear a lot of people ask. Where are you from? And I think that's one of those surface level small talk questions that we can use to break the ice. But how can you move the conversation onto a deeper level after that?
Okay, this is starting to get fun for me. Let me ask you, David, where are you from?
Well, I'm from the Highlands of Scotland.
Oh, I've always wanted to go there. Do you still live there?
Yes, I sure do.
That's great. What do you like best about living there?
Oh, well, I've always lived there, so it's home, and all my family and friends are here. It's a quiet town, lots of fresh air.
Nice. I have been thinking recently I'd love to go live in a quieter place with more fresh air, being able to enjoy the outdoors more. You probably grew up being outdoors, though, enjoying the landscape and the country.
Well, it is something I probably take for granted, I have to say. My football friends all live here. I keep in touch with them, and we have football videos that we made years ago, and we've got lots of things to talk about, so it's all great fun for me.
So now, do you see how I asked that one question and it immediately put you at ease? And you shared some things about yourself, and there's so many directions I can take this conversation in now. Like I could ask you more about football, or I could ask you about the production work you do. I could ask you more about Scotland, food. Mm-hmm. That's another fairly safe topic.
Most Americans want to know about haggis.
Right. And by the way, do you eat haggis regularly?
It's a once a year thing, but yeah, I do taste it every now and then.
Nice. But you see how just asking a simple question, showing you're curious about the other person, and then really paying attention to what they say, this is what moves conversations to a deeper level.
Yeah, very good. I do see that. And something you started to say earlier has me curious, Edythe. For you and your personality type, would you feel offended if someone didn't ask you questions? I mean, would that make you feel as though they weren't interested in you?
Well, of course it depends on the situation. And me just being aware of different people and personalities, my answer may be different from that of other ENFP types. I really do give people the benefit of the doubt, and I try very hard to understand where the other person is coming from. And I have to say that there have been times when I questioned the other person's interest if they didn't ask me questions or try to engage with me, or if they were really flat in their response or didn't demonstrate good eye contact. But I also understand it can be difficult for certain people and personality types to take that leap. But let me say this. I also think that people overestimate how intrusive their questions may be. So again, I'd say to start small and safe and then watch the other person's response. I do this a lot. I watch and I listen to other people, and it always gives me clues as to what they're tuned into and how self-absorbed they may be. So if I try to talk about something that's personal to me and the other person just brings the conversation back to themselves, then yeah, that's a bit of a red flag.
Yes. Sadly, we've all experienced that from time to time.
Right. And the amount of time someone allows to pass before they take an interest in us is another strong indicator of who they are. And then you just have to ask yourself if you want to continue that conversation. And sometimes we have to, like at work-related functions, for example. In fact, I was just having a conversation with a woman I know very well the other day. I hadn't seen her in a while, and I wanted to tell her some things that had happened to me. But every time I tried, she interrupted me and talked about something that happened to her. So I started down one conversation path, and she immediately took over the conversation to something that she was interested in. And when these types of situations happen, it's hard to be genuinely engaged. And often the other person is oblivious.
Yeah, that was disappointing, I'm sure, Edythe. Do you think she was oblivious about the effect that she had on you?
Absolutely. But I give her a pass because she has a lot of other good qualities. And I also know that she has a need to be heard. And I had the need to get certain information from her. So I look at it as a win-win. But these types of interactions can be exhausting.
Yeah, even for an extrovert.
Yes, even for we extroverts.
So, summing up your second point about good conversations, asking the right question at the right time, and watch the other person for cues so you'll know what your boundaries are.
Yes, and this will help you get to that deeper level of conversation, which is what will help us to have more meaningful interactions. And I'm afraid to some extent there's just no avoiding small talk.
It does seem so. And it's one of those things some people, or some personality types, are just going to be better at than others. But this doesn't mean that we can't exercise those muscles.
Right. These are skills anyone can learn. It's just a matter of where you decide to put your effort.
Yeah, well said, Edythe. Thank you once again for sharing your expertise.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Myers-Briggs Question Corner. We still need your help to get the word out there about the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. So please give us a like, a share, a comment, a rating. Anything you can do to help would be great. And if you have a question about personality or the Myers-Briggs that you'd like Edythe to answer on air, by all means, let us know. This is David Terrace, producer of the series, signing off. Until next time. Thanks for listening to this episode. If you'd like to hear more, or you'd like to submit a question yourself, then you can find us at www.atopcareer.com. Until next time. MBTI and Myers-Briggs are registered trademarks of the MBTI Trust.